What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review the new movie 365 Days This Day, which is the sequel to the 2020 viral sensation 365 Days. This new movie just dropped on Netflix. But before I get to my official review, I just want to apologize for the lack of activity on this channel. I've actually been out of the country in Ireland working on a short documentary directed by the great Robert O'Mara, and that'll be coming out later in the spring. Coming back from Ireland, I managed to get sick. You can probably hear it in my voice. I've got like fluid coming out of my eyes and my nose, and anyway, I'm a mess. But what better way to try to get over a cold than to watch some really outrageous softcore pornography bordering on soap opera? I don't even know how to describe the genre for the 365 Days franchise, because I don't really believe in guilty pleasures, because if you like something or if you're watching something, you should just own it. But it's like when I watch these movies, the stuff that I like, obviously, is the completely, totally outrageous sex scenes. And then I kind of hate everything else. But if you don't know what I'm talking about, these movies are based on a book trilogy by, and forgive my pronunciation on with these Polish names, I'm hopeless on this front, but Blanka Lipinska, I believe is the name of the author, but she's also working on the screenplays for these movies. And this was supposed to come out a lot sooner, but COVID interfered with the production. And according to her bio on Wikipedia, apparently this erotic trilogy of novels that she wrote were kind of loosely inspired by the 50 Shades of Grey franchise, but also a personal holiday to Sicily. And if you know the plot of the first movie, I don't know how much of that movie was autobiographical, but the idea of essentially like keeping someone in captivity for a year until they fall in love with you, yeah, it's a pretty outrageous scenario. But the plot for this new one is quite different. This is more of a love triangle. It picks up right where the previous one left off. And I believe that the next movie in this trilogy has already been shot. That's just called Next 365 Days. Wildly original. But that'll be coming out on Netflix sometime in the foreseeable future. But let's talk about this movie. I'm not really sure if spoilers are even something that like people are all that concerned with when discussing this franchise, but I'll keep my comments very vague and broad initially in case you haven't seen these movies yet, and then I'll get more specific as I go, and I'll give you a fair warning ahead of time. But the synopsis on IMDb for this latest one is Laura and Massimo are back and stronger than ever, but Massimo's family ties and a mysterious man bidding for Laura's heart complicate the lovers' lives. And as I was watching it, I was kind of blown away by just how little story there is in this second movie, at least for like the first 45, 50 minutes. And surprisingly enough, that first 45, 50 minutes is actually the stronger part of this movie, because it follows a very simple formula, which is give us an outrageous sex scene, followed by a really cheesy montage of like people eating or drinking or shopping or driving. It really is almost like a Jekyll and Hyde scenario where the best scenes are wildly entertaining, very exciting, very revealing. And I would argue that the sex scenes in this movie are much stronger than in the first one. But they're always followed by these scenes that are almost unwatchable. I mean, if there is a hell, my personal version of hell would be trapped listening to the soundtrack to this movie on a loop. I mean, I found the music to be totally, completely unendurable. However, there is no denying the sex appeal of the two leads. You've got Anna Maria Cicluca, if I'm saying that correctly, as the main character Laura, and of course you have Michelle Morrone as Don Massimo, and they just look like they were, like carved out of marble by some like great Renaissance artist. They like the sex appeal is off the charts, and it looks like they spent the last 2 years since the previous one doing nothing but working out and just working on their sex moves, for lack of a better term, because when you watch these scenes, they're choreographed almost like a dance sequence in like an old like Gene Kelly movie or old Fred Astaire movie, because it's not like they're just turning on the cameras and saying, all right, make it hot. I mean, the lighting and the production value and the way they transition from one move to the next, anybody out there who's ever enjoyed the wondrous exchange of bodily fluids out there know that there's a lot of kind of clumsy fumbling and kind of, not all of us were cut out to be porn stars, but when you watch these two actors in action, it's an incredible physical performance. And these two actors just absolutely hold nothing back, and they have incredible chemistry. And I think the best chemistry is revealed when they're kind of flirting with each other, trying to get their juices flowing before the inevitable sex scenes, the way they're always kind of like nibbling or licking each other's necks or ears or whatever the case might be. But Anna Maria Cicluca, She is just totally game, and she knows how to communicate volumes with just a slight raise of the eyebrow or the way she uses her body language or the expression she's making. If she wasn't able to sell the sex appeal, this whole franchise would just completely, totally fall apart. And so my big question going into this was, would it be able to sustain our interest with just marital bliss or lack thereof? Because obviously part of the main hook in the first movie while she was in captivity was, it's kind of like a will they or won't they scenario. And then I can remember in 2020 on Twitter when people just like kind of laughing uproariously about just how outrageous and lengthy and intense the inevitable sex scenes were. So I think this movie very wisely chose to front load this movie with like 45 minutes of like almost nonstop softcore pornography. But then where the movie gets into trouble is with this love triangle with the introduction of this really hot gardener, or a guy who claims he's a gardener, who basically is like just as tall and just as shredded as Michelle Morrone. But we almost kind of get into Twilight territory with like, the two hot guys competing for the central character's attention. And this new stud is played by Simone Susina, if I'm saying that correctly. And he basically spends most of the movie either surfing or telling Laura how beautiful she is. I'm sure some girls are just going to absolutely eat these sequences up. And there's a little background noise in terms of the plot with these rival mafia families in Sicily competing for power, and how Laura becomes almost like a chess piece that's kind of caught in the middle of all this. And I guess I can't go any further without going into some spoilers. So if you've not yet seen the first movie or the second movie, bail out now. But I guess my final word would be, if you enjoy ridiculous kind of soap opera melodramas with liberal quantities of softcore pornography, there's no penetration or anything, but there's plenty of like doggy style and oral sex and just, like sexual acrobatics that are absolutely wild to watch. For those scenes alone, these movies are worth the price of admission. But don't go into these movies expecting to enjoy anything else, or at least that would be my final word. But as far as spoilers go, the big hook is that we learn that Massimo has a twin brother, an evil twin brother, kind of a dumb twin brother. He was born 10 minutes later. His mind doesn't quite work, but he's making his big move to try to steal the criminal empire away from Massimo by teaming up with another family, and also introducing the idea that Massimo's been unfaithful to Laura. When Laura sees the twin, a twin who she's unaware that even exists, but she sees him getting it on with another girl and runs off with the gardener, which leads to an inevitable kidnapping and then finally this big shootout at the end. And I was actually surprised by just how vicious the shootout was at the end, which leads to yet another cliffhanger. Obviously, the first movie ended with that assassination attempt in the tunnel where she lost the baby, and this new one ends with an even bloodier climax. And I will come back to watch the third movie. Like I said, these movies, so much about them, I find them to be completely absurd and ridiculous, but I do laugh with joy and entertainment while watching them. So I don't take that lightly. If a movie's getting to you, no matter what kind of intellectual reservations you might have or reservations you might have based on good taste, if a movie's having an impact on you emotionally, if it's stimulating your imagination, well then you should just admit it. And as much as I might criticize how these movies just have one musical montage after another, basically just thinly veiled music videos, I guess they're not as bad as listening to like a really crummy script. It's like in the absence of a good script, instead, they'll just have a long driving sequence with people, kind of caressing each other or drinking wine or whatever the case might be. You could describe these movies as empty calories, but they're really good looking, stylish, fun empty calories. And so I'll totally give credit where credit is due to author Blanka Lipinska. She's created a world, she's created some characters. These are best-selling books, and these are movies that are wildly popular on Netflix, and that is far more success than most writers ever achieved, so bravo. I'm always rooting for more sex in movies. I'm always rooting for more adult movies, and while these movies might have the emotional maturity of like a high school melodrama, I keep coming back for more, so clearly they're doing something right. And for everybody out there who's going to criticize these movies rightly for just the empty consumerism that's just on display, people have been enjoying wealth porn for decades. If you go back to like Hollywood movies in the 1930s, during the Great Depression, one of the main appeals of a movie by a studio like MGM was that you would see a lot of lace curtains and champagne and tuxedos, basically people dressed up well and just enjoying themselves. It's total wish fulfillment on the part of a lot of viewers who will never get to experience that level of luxury. So I get why these movies just keep shoving in one ridiculous shopping sequence after another, even if I find those scenes to be totally worthless. But there is an audience for those kinds of scenes. So as we look ahead to the third movie, I guess the big question is, how can they top what has come before? And I guess they'll just have to go to like full-blown porn, because these movies are very they very discreetly place the camera in places where you're never seeing like full-blown genitalia. However, I would argue that this movie is more revealing than those that came before, or at least for whatever reason, I found it to be more stimulating on that front. But maybe we'll get some crazy threesome between Laura and her two lovers. But that reminds me, before I wrap up this video, I should mention that my podcast, Wrong Reel, recently got sponsored by Manscaped. And for people out there who don't know, Manscaped, they're the world's foremost experts on men's below-the-waist grooming. And so whilst the podcast is officially being sponsored, I do have the go-ahead to share the promo code on this YouTube channel. So check out the show notes below. If you want to save 20% over on Manscaped, use the promo code Wrong Reel. But I think I've said about all I need to say about these movies. I'll be very curious to hear how people react, because obviously the first movie was this crazy viral sensation, which is what led to the next two movies getting the green light. But I imagine reactions are going to be all over the place, and that's totally fine. But in the end, as someone who despises the fact that most Hollywood movies today are geared towards a more childlike sensibility, I will always show up for these Italian/Polish co-productions where they just lean into the fact that they recognize that people do enjoy watching the physical act of love on the big screen, so high five to Netflix for making these movies happen. But I think that's all I got to say for now. As far as what's coming up on the future in this channel, I'm looking forward to reviewing the new Doctor Strange movie next week. I've been really enjoying the show Winning Time on HBO. I'll definitely be reviewing the season finale. I'm going to get caught up on Better Call Saul and start reviewing that on this channel again, so I'm going to be resurrecting this channel as soon as this goddamn head cold has been eradicated, because even getting through this video has been like a Herculean effort. But thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, please consider liking the channel, subscribing, hitting that notification bell, and hunt me down on Twitter at Geeking Out if you want to talk more. But thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.